Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the stream. All right. How's everybody doing? Um, as you can see from my greeting, um, daylight savings time ended in the state of Utah last night. It used to be that I knew when all this stuff was going to happen. Now I just don't pay attention anymore. So, um, I forgot to set my alarm last night before bed, and still managed to get up on time. So I guess that's the only benefit as I see it around um, daylight savings time ending. Hey, Ola, welcome to the stream, man. Um, all right. I am just finishing up the updates to packages and then testing this morning. Um, so we'll grab all of this, upgrade all of that, and then we're going to leave these alone. I don't want to mess with them right now. Um, there's nothing in here that I want to manage myself, so I'll allow NX to manage them. Then we'll talk a little bit about just the releases. So while that is running, this morning, well, on the 29th, Angular moved out of early access. Well, it's still early access. I'm calling it early access because of like Steam or whatever, right? It's not really early access. They moved off of the next branch to the release candidate branch. What does that mean? Well, that means that anything that's not experimental is going to be much more stable. The APIs are largely stabilized. The only things that are going to go in are like major bug changes or major findings at this point. So we'll probably have a couple of release candidate releases, and then Angular 21 will drop soon, which is exciting. There wasn't really anything in here that was I mean, they fixed a memory leak, and then fixed iteration over fours to make sure they're reactive, but nothing really major over last week. And the RC is this 21 next 10. Did I ever work with any other front end frameworks? Man, I've worked with so many over the years. Are you talking? I imagine you're going like web specific here, but like I've worked with like WPF for building Windows forms. Um, I've worked with Xcode and a couple of different frameworks for the Mac. But going back to web frameworks, um, man, I've done so from way back in the day. Like the first framework I really picked up was Prototype, and then MooTools, and then Knockout, and then jQuery fits somewhere in those four because jQuery was basically everywhere. And if you look at the amount of web by percentage, jQuery is still probably the largest front end out there. Like outdated jQuery. Reactor View, um, it has been a long time since I've done Reactor View. I just my exploration has been more into AI and stuff like that. So um, I'm not up to date on modern React or Vue practices. Um, and I haven't looked at React in probably longer than Vue. I actually enjoy Vue more than React. React has some really cool ideas, and I like the idea of compositional components and things like that. But from a joy of use point of view, I find Vue to be more. Um, I find it to be more fun um, than React, and it tends to fit better with kind of my Angular way of thinking about things. Right. Um, One of the things about say say I go create a React project. Um, what it's really going to be is me trying to write Angular in React until my brain starts to get into the React flow, um, which can take a long time. Um, and it's the same way with Vue. When I go create a Vue project, it's really me trying to write Angular in Vue. Um, and I mean, it's just, that's so what I've been working in for so long that it takes your brain a long time to learn. Like the fundamentals transfer really well across all the frameworks. Everything from like components and state management and like all of those fundamentals, right? How to structure and good code hygiene and things like that. What doesn't transfer is like the nuances. Um, so some of the stuff from Angular and the various React hooks um, and things like that. Right, like I don't have the nuances of the code, so it winds up. I mean, it's very very similar to like if you go learn a foreign language. When you first learn a foreign language, it's really you speaking your language in the framework of that foreign language. Um, so there are nuances of the language that you're not picking up. So you can communicate and you can do it okay, but everybody can tell that you're not a native speaker of that language. And then after probably a good long time, you start to pick up on the nuances, and you start to pick up on um, colloquialisms and things like that, and you start to get more and more fluent. But the interesting thing is that, like, even if we take English as an example here, when we talk about English, right? Like there's Southern African English, there's British English, there's Irish and Scottish English, there's American English, there's Canadian English, there's Australian English, there's Indian English, right? Like the flavors and nuances of English are so different. And as an American speaker, it's possible for me to say something that comes off of as funny sounding to somebody who speaks British English, for example, right? And vice versa, right? It's very, very easy for somebody who speaks another flavor of English to say something unintentionally that sounds funny to an American English speaker. It's the same way with the frameworks, right? So even if I learn Angular really, really well, um, and I look back on my career, Brazier's Angular is different than Odessa Angular, which is different than Fidelis Angular, which is different than Bill Angular, which is different than the Angular spoken at my current job, right? Um, all of that stuff um, contributes, and I think when you get into, I mean, one of the things that distinguishes React from Angular is React sets itself up as a library, not a framework. Angular and Vue both view themselves as frameworks. And there's a big important issue to understand there, that with a library, there's a lot more freedom. But the downside to that freedom is that the change in dialect, so to speak, right? If I go to one company and learn their React framework, and they use this certain tool for routing, and they use this certain tool for state management, and they use this certain tool for gets and fetches, and they use this certain tool for whatever, right? When I move to another company, that other company may not even use that same tool chain. They may use different versions. They may have opinionation on that tool chain. They may have opinionation on JSX. They may have opinionation on all sorts of stuff, right? And so the differences in dialects across companies is even greater. You may have the fundamentals of React down, but moving between companies or even projects within the same company can often be more difficult than if you're using like a framework like Vue or Angular. That's why Next is very, very popular in the React world, because Next is a framework built on top of React. And so you get some of that opinionation, making it easier to move between projects and understand projects. Hopefully that answers your question, Ole. Definitely off on a little bit of a tangent, and I probably should have been paying attention in the background. But we're all good here. So let's go ahead and commit this. I'm still trying to decide. Like, I've been growing out a beard for a bit. I'm still trying to decide if I want to keep it. I actually find myself playing with it a lot, and I don't like that. Especially as we're coming up on cold season, it seems really weird to be putting my hands near my mouth. And so I'm trying to decide if I want to shave it off or not. But again, there's some pros and cons to it. One of the big cons that I wasn't aware of is, like, if I eat or drink something, it's amazing how much stuff gets trapped in parts of my beard, and I don't know. There's a lot. I do like the way it changes my jawline. I don't know, stuff like that. So I'll be Santa's helper this year. Hey, Stony, good to see you, man. Santa's helper, I don't know, man. Like, that guy has never liked me. That's what I tell my daughters. Even when they were young and still believed in Santa, man, that guy hates me. So my daughters grew up thinking that Santa hated me. It's always just kind of been a running joke in my family that I don't get along with Santa Claus. So maybe I'm trying to depose the tyrant who enforces his moral structure on kids through his reign of terror with toys. My wife, the other night we were having a discussion, and we were talking about like a show that I was watching with my youngest daughter, and the way I described it, my wife really didn't like. I can't even remember what the show was. But she's like, you always make every show sound worse than it actually is. And I was kind of laughing about that. And so I started like talking about common shows about, the girl who's trapped in a tower by her evil stepmom and cuts off her hair because some guy's trying to break in. It's kind of the way I was going about describing like movies and stuff like that. Making it sound much more dark than it actually is. If you guys aren't aware, I'm a very big fan of like dark fiction. If like a book or a movie or a series ends in an unsatisfying way, I actually really enjoy it. And so there have been some anime that I've been watching that has some dark endings, and some series on TV and stuff that has some dark endings. And then, I'm a big fan of like dystopian type stuff. So um, I like to um, I I like to troll a little bit sometimes. And so it's always fun to take something that's happy and whatever and try and make it sound dystopian. Um, yeah, welcome to the stream. Let's get into things. Well, first of all, let's see. I just finished the upgrades. Let's see if the project even serves. That's a good place to start, right? Update all the libraries, and this is a very streamer thing to do. Um, and there's a good reason why, as a streamer, I do things this way versus what I recommend you should do. If you're working on a personal project, this is not a bad way to go. If you're working on a work project, never do what I just did. Never upgrade every library and then test. You should be testing at every step along the way and fixing along the way. The reason I say that it's a good thing as a streamer and it's a good thing as a personal project is because the opportunity for catastrophic failure goes up quite a bit when you just upgrade a whole bunch of libraries and you're like, YOLO, let's see what happens, right? It, it makes for good content. And one of the things, one of the biggest pieces of advice I would give to anybody, if you're interested in streaming at all, the biggest piece of advice I would give to you is realize right off the bat that you're an entertainer. Your job is to entertain. And so as a streamer, if I make a big mess, we've learned from shows like American Idol and things like that, right? That people like to watch other people suffer and struggle. And so good content is a streamer like making their own mess and then trying to fix it. And I mean, there are other reasons why streamers might seem dumb. There's this whole monologue that you have to keep going as you're working, right? It's entertainment first. Personal project. When you're working on your own and you break things, those, in my opinion, are your greatest opportunities to learn. And I think that when you're working on personal stuff, you should be stretching, you should be learning. And that's why, doing all your upgrades at once in a personal project, great. Doing all of your upgrades on a stream, great. At work and causing problems for others, not so great, right? Standard schema. I want to take a look at this, Ole. Thank you for sharing this. Let's copy this. Because we're going to get into some TanStack stuff today. I want to build the TanStack. So a standard schema. Oh, this is part of TanStack form. So they're using both ValidBot and Zod, both standard schema. And so they create the Zod schema that's an object with a first name, add some validation. Obviously, they're tagging it here because they want to know that where it comes from, and then last name. So they're saying that your name has to start with an A, and the only restriction with first name and last name is that they have to be at least 3 characters. So sorry if your last name is like Lee from Chinese, right? LI or something like that, where you don't have at least 3 characters. This is not internationally friendly, but whatever. And then having to start with an A rules out, a vast majority of first names. But they're doing the same. Actually, no, they are doing the same thing with Valibot. So Valibot, very, very similar. Valibot uses a pipe, which is very similar to the way you construct like RxJS or things like that. Pipes are powerful. These are often called, these can often be called train wrecks because you get ... And if anything breaks along the way, it can become more difficult. With pipes, there are downsides too, but pipes can be constructed and manipulated, and they accomplish the same thing. Just typically, from like a compositional standpoint, it's better to use a pipe type structure for validation over like these training things together. I like Zod, but that is a common complaint around it, right? Is that you get these long ... This practice is used quite a bit with configuration files, right, and builders. And so, if we argue that a Zod schema is a builder, then this is a very common pattern, right? If we argue that a Valibot schema is a validation, then a pipe is a common pattern, right? But important things to understand when choosing libraries and things like that is, fundamentally these two are different, even though they look very, very similar. Valibot relies on a pipe type structure. Zod relies on returning itself and then appending things to that. And then it looks like we use a standard schema. Then they built up a struct. Very, very fascinating. I'm going to keep this in mind, but yeah. Oh yeah, it's hella entertaining when everything breaks live. One of my mods entertains himself breaking my overlay with Chatwish. See, I'm not that big. I don't have mods that are tinkering and stuff like that. And maybe someday, if I get super serious about this, maybe I'll get bigger. And I've always got ideas to build bots and things like that. But then work or whatever else happens. I'll be honest with you guys. The biggest reason that I'm still streaming is, one, I want to help people out there in the community just understand what can be done to help level up your career. Two, it's entertaining for me. And three, it's one of the few ways I get to write code anymore. So yeah. I do spend time preparing for streams, but if I really want to grow, I need to be much more serious, and so I've got to decide if I want to take any more of my very limited personal time and push into streaming. I don't think I'll ever replace my job with streaming. The niche area that Angular fits will never make enough money for that to even be a possibility. And the reality is that people who make enough money, everybody knows who they are because they've put in the effort, they put in the work. They're very, very good at what they do. It's the right combination of effort, skill, and luck to reach that level. And the issue is it's much like becoming like a rock star or a pop icon or something like that, or a professional athlete, or these areas where there's a very, very small niche, and an actor, things like that. There are probably people out there who can play their instruments better than some of the famous people out there. There are probably people out there who can sing better than some of the famous people out there. Well, I know there are, right? There are people out there who can play better than pros. There are people out there who can, act better than professional actors. But the difference often comes down to the right time, the right place, the right connections, luck, things like that. The reality is there's a very, very small amount of space to be one of the elites. And so you can work really, really hard. And this sounds very, very negative. I don't want it to sound negative, but you can work very, very, very hard. You can be better than the people who are at the top, but you will still never reach the top. And, it comes down to connections. It comes down to right time, right place. It comes down to so many various variables. And it's the same in the streaming space. There are only so many people willing to watch at a certain amount of, at a certain time. And if you're not one of the top people, it's unlikely you're going to get those views. That's not me saying don't do it. That's me saying that if you get into things like that, right, do it for yourself. Get something out of it yourself. If you're not getting something out of streaming, if you're not getting something out of whatever you're doing, you're going to hit these times where it becomes difficult to want to continue doing what you're doing. And there have been times where it's been very difficult. Like I'll wake up on a Sunday morning and I'm just like, I don't really want to stream today. If you're not getting something out of it for yourself, it can become very burdensome, and it can feel like the community is a burden and things like that. You never want to reach that point. So, when you're doing something, whatever it is, unless it's feeding your family, make sure you're getting something out of it. And even in the case of feeding your family, like your job, right? You're still getting something out of it, right? You're feeding your family. But that's the lens that I like to take a look at things. What am I getting out of this? And whatever that is, it's up to you to determine what those values are and what's going to drive you. But just, we need to realize there's only so much space at the top. And you could often be the best in your field and not reach the top. And that's perfectly fine. As long as you are getting something out of it, you don't have to be at the top. It would be nice to be at the top, right? Because the top has good salaries, has good recognition and things like that. And I'm never going to downplay being at the top is probably amazing. I've never been at the top. But at the same time, realizing that, hey, I'm going to work as hard as I can for me is more important than I'm going to work as hard as I can for whatever external reason. Those external reasons aren't going to drive you. So, surprise of table, interesting if TANSTAC forms make sense while signal forms are here. So I like the direction your thoughts are going, Ole. I think TANSTAC forms makes a lot of sense in the absence of a good forms framework. I was looking heavily at TANSTAC forms because it's no secret I'm not a reactive forms fan, and I haven't been. Like Ward Bell, the reason I liked what Ward Bell was saying was that it agreed with what I thought then I really thought he was saying anything groundbreaking or anything like that. And so TanStack forms, or TanStack form made a lot of sense to me, because when you do template driven, there's a lot of tools that you create yourself over and over again. TanStack form created those, and it was community maintained. TanStack form makes a lot of sense in the React ecosystem. It brings some structure to the way you do forms and you validate forms and things like that. To your point, Ola, I don't think like with signal forms and things like that, the argument is a little bit more difficult in the Angular space. One thing I do want to point out, if you talk to like Brandon Roberts or like Chow Tran, they'll tell you that it's tough to create a library for Angular because the Angular community is very, very quick to say, oh, that's not from the Angular team. That's not Angular, right? And so it's very, very tough to create an Angular library and break into the Angular ecosystem. The opposite is true of React, where libraries are created and discarded and created and discarded almost at will within the React ecosystem. That's a fundamental difference. So I don't want to discourage people from using TanStack form, because the people at TanStack are putting a lot of effort into making Angular good, right? And bringing a lot of the same tools that React has to Angular. So I don't want to say that you shouldn't use it because Angular signal forms are great and blah, blah, blah. Maybe what we need to do is after we finish up this arc on signal forms, let's take a look at building something, because signal forms, one thing we need to recognize is signal forms is still experimental, meaning that it's not even recommended for production use. TanStack, on the other hand, is. So maybe we take a look at TanStack and compare it to Angular. So I think that would be hugely helpful. And I think it's important for us to recognize that there are amazing libraries out there that if we don't support them as a community, they're going to languish and be abandoned. So I appreciate you bringing up TanStack, Ola. I'm just working on my project on stream with music on, so people come in, have a little chat, and go do some work with me while enjoying the music. Yeah, I'm so worried about copyright that, and the copyright-free music is, some of it's really good, some of it you can tell it's copyright-free, and a lot of it now is AI generated and has, I don't know. So I've never done a music stream. You'll have to let me know how that goes. Oh, I don't stream to YouTube, so it's not an issue. That's a. Does Twitch not nail you for using copyrighted music? Yeah, Ole, I don't like reactive forms as well. There's just something about the concept I like, but the implementation, there's just something about it that never really resonated with me with reactive forms. Yeah, Stony, I stream to Twitch, I stream to YouTube, and I stream to X. So I know that YouTube and X both have strong copyright stuff, and so that's, yeah. They mute the audio in the VOD, but you can stream with two audio tracks where one has music and the other does not. That's a good point. And a little bit inside the streamer, right? But Stony is not wrong. So if you guys look, this is kind of my view right now. If I come into here and I go to my properties on my audio, I can set up all sorts of audio and control, I can control whether my desktop, you can see that my desktop audio is right now muted to you guys. That way you guys aren't getting the stuff that's coming through my headphones, like all the different noises and stuff. And you know, my webcam has a mic on it. I've got that muted, but you can set up different audio tracks and what device is being monitored and all of that stuff. So a little bit behind the scenes, but very, very cool. That's a good idea. It's a very good idea, Stony. Thank you for the input there. Let's finally get into you know, what we've set up. So last week, and it looks like it's still working. So last week we got a bunch of stuff set up here from our reviews. Well, that's one thing I haven't looked at yet today is, you know, what did our review say? This form's all working. We need to get this turned into a component so that we can edit this data using, you know, a click event here. Right now, our click events only show, hey, right, we're just echoing the JSON to the screen. Echoing the alerting, right? We've also got errors that go on here, so we can see our errors here, and up here we can also see that we've got our errors in place. So that's where we're going to be here. We want to be able to reset this, so that's another piece that we want to take care of. So let's take a look at how we do that. One of the things that I want to make sure we do, well, let's get this into its own component. But first, let's take a look at, that is not what I wanted. Let's take a look at our pull requests. So let's go back to our pull requests. Let's look at our most recently closed pull request from last week's stream. And let's just see what's going on. One of the things that I really like about LLMs, and I like the way they're able to summarize what happened, right? So we upgraded some major dependencies. So right, it summarizes that we upgraded Angular and NX. We added the NGRX signal store. We added a new store and integrated it with the to-do component. It picked that up. We refactored the star input quite a bit. And then the to-do model now creates a create date. There's a reason that I added the create date. And I want to add a due date also, which is something we're going to do because I want to wrap a date input also. Something that's going to be moving from, because a JavaScript date is very different from how you display dates to users. JavaScript date object is really what a lot of other languages call a date time because it includes a date and a time, and it includes time zone information in there. So I do want to add a due date and allow us to pick that from the editor because I want to wrap a date picker because I want to see what that's like with the current signal forms. The code review, which I haven't looked at yet, says that the to-do list store is provided in the component level. This means that every instance of the to-do component will have its, this is absolutely true, and this is what is intended. And so, you know, when you're getting this feedback, and if we look at this as like a more senior level person or somebody reviewing our code, they're not wrong, right? The fact that we're providing the to-do list store in the to-do component gives us all of this stuff, but this is intentional. And so when you're in a code review, it can feel very adversarial to get a comment like this. Hey, Abira Codes. Is that Abradores? But welcome to the stream. But when you get a review like this, it can feel very personal. Abiram here. Oh, eight. I'll be okay. Okay. Sounds good. Thank you for letting me know. Um, and yeah, welcome back. Good to have you here. Um, but one thing to remember, first of all, when providing feedback on a pull request, um, be very, very careful about what you say. One of the problems with written text, um, when we talk to somebody, we get vocal inflections, um, we get we get facial expressions, we get micro expressions, we get hand gestures. There's a whole bunch of context that we derive from what somebody's saying, when we can look at them. As soon as they say something in text, we lose all of that, and that's why people use emojis a lot. I'm very difficult. I almost said gifted. I'm very gifted at emojis. No, I use emojis quite a bit, because to me that emotional context is an important part of communication, um, and um, I worry that people are going to take what I say harshly. Sometimes the use of emojis can go the opposite route and turn you into a bit of a clown where nobody takes what you say seriously. So they're right, like written text is very, very difficult. So when you're writing PRs, um, when you're writing comments on somebody's PR, recognize that they could very well take what you're saying in the absolute worst way. So be generous with your comments. Provide backup. Um, don't accuse. Don't it's very, very easy for people to take things the wrong way, even if you didn't intend that. If you intend to be adversarial or confrontational in a PR, you probably shouldn't be reviewing the code. Um, you're not doing any favors to anybody. Being adversarial and confrontational just fractures teams. It's going to cause the person that you're attacking to dig in. You're not providing any benefit. So, first of all, never be adversarial. It's not beneficial to anybody. Second of all, when you write your comments, be very, very careful and be evidence based. Um, and finally, be willing to compromise with somebody. So, for example, like this comment here, everything said here is totally true. Typically a store is meant to be a singleton within the application to share state. Providing it here defeats that purpose. I could take this comment, right? Like, I'm probably more generous with this comment because I know it's coming from an LLM, right? Not a real human. But this comment coming from a real human could be very triggering, right? Providing it here defeats the purpose. This could be so. As a person being reviewed, the other thing you need to do is give space to the person reviewing. What they're saying may not be as mean or as bad as what you think it is. So the way I would respond to this comment, because it's an AI, I can just ignore it. But if it's somebody else providing this comment, my response would be, yes, we want an individual to-do list store for every to-do that we drop onto the page, because we may want more to-do editors on a single page. Right? And then I might end that with something, what would you suggest? Or something along those lines. Giving the opportunity for a compromise to be discussed. I don't, as this person being reviewed, I don't want to be adversarial or confrontational either. Both sides should never be adversarial or confrontational. We need to recognize that the point of a PR is not for me to beat you over the head with what I think is perfect code. as a reviewer, the point of a PR as a reviewer is to make sure that the code that's going into our repository is code that everybody wants to work on and maintain, and that everybody feels good about, that also fits within the larger context of the project, right? There's a lot of context there. Very little or almost nothing of what I said should come down to arguing about spaces. And I'm calling myself out here because I've done this before, right? We should be using 2 spaces, or this should be indented this way, or you're using the wrong kind of quotes. I've made these comments before in the past. I'm calling myself out here. Those kind of comments are worthless. They're not helping the overall. If as a team you decide that, hey, we need to use certain types of quotes, we need to use certain types of spacing, we want our code formatted a certain way, set up prettier rules. Set up a way for people to get prettier rules changed, and then stick to that governance pattern. Use linters to help maintain that. The linters are going to apply that rule much more consistently than you ever will. People are used to linters and prettier, and it allows you as a reviewer to focus on the bigger picture, right? This is a bigger picture issue. Introducing a store at a component level instead of a higher level, we can have a discussion about where this belongs. Maybe we agree that instead of at a component level, maybe this lives at a route level or at a parent level or even at a global level, but we can have that discussion. As a person being reviewed, one, even if the person is more senior than you, provide context as to why you made your choice, right? Unless what they're saying is obviously right, and there's a bit of a give and take and dance. But if say this comment was coming from me and I was like, yeah, typically it should be a singleton, providing it here defeats this purpose. I'm a director or a staff level engineer and you're like a mid-level or junior engineer, oftentimes it's very, very easy to cave, right? There's a lot of pressure because, hey, this person way above me on the food chain is saying, do it differently. Be very, very, be evidence-based. I provided it here because we want this to have a store for every instance of this component. It's very intentional. You're right in what you say, and we intentionally chose that. What would you suggest? And then start working on that compromise. Also realize that you don't have to compromise on everything. Sometimes it's good enough to just be like, hey, this store is meant to be injected this way for the exact reasons that you called out, and then that can end it there. But as a reviewer and a reviewee, understanding that each person has different points of view, and taking the time to understand those points of view and then being evidence-based in what you're saying is going to make your reviews better, and it's going to make your code base better in general. So, hey, Marcus, welcome to the stream. So Abiram Code says, what do you think about temporal date object? Oh, man. This is like my most anticipated feature for like the past 10 years. Like the temporal date object is amazing. I believe once it is stable, these date-related issues will be reduced as we have with the current JS date object. Totally agree, Abiram. You are totally correct. Temporal date TC39. For people who aren't aware, there's a TC39 proposal. That means that this has made it to the ES work group. And I think it's a stage 3 proposal. Yeah, it's stage 3 at this point in time. Stage 3 means that it's been reviewed. The next step is stage 4, and stage 4 means that the browsers will start adding it. It's been stage 3 for I can't even remember how many years. Like, I'm not joking when I say temporal's probably been my most anticipated feature since the past 10 years. I'm really not joking about that. I can't even remember when this was first started. I guess 5 years ago, or some of the oldest ones, right? So I guess the past 5 years. It's been around for a long time, and it quickly went to stage 3. It's been stage 3 for a very long time. We're getting hung up on a lot of nuances to dates, and dates are difficult. JavaScript. I'm not a robot. Oh my goodness. There's a car. That's a truck. Is a truck a car? And these are vans. And look, there's a little car there. Oh, good. We get to pick everything that has a bus in it. Great. Thank you, Google, for that. I'll need to find this, but there's this whole series of programming. We know you're a robot. I'm totally a robot. I am totally a robot. I'm one of the most advanced VTubers out there. On the, not quite on the level of like Neurosama yet, but I'm working on it. And my model's not where I want it to be. So no, there's this whole series of, you're doing dates wrong, you're doing names wrong, you're doing all these other things wrong, and it's just a list of everything that can go wrong. And that's part of the reason why temporal has been stage 3 for so long, is that there are so many ways that you can get temporal wrong. You can get dates wrong, but there's some very, very cool stuff to it. Temporal includes just a date. There's a date only object that has no time zone associated with it, because here's the crazy thing. So from where I am, and like the Indian time zones are off by a half hour. And this leads to some messy stuff around midnight. So like US based time zones and Indian time zones around midnight can get very, very messy, where the US thinks that we're one day and India thinks we're another day. But all the other time zones are, directly on the hour, but because we're off by half an hour, it just makes a mess. And so you can get into these situations where where India thinks that we're a day earlier or a day later than what the date math is based on, right? Like, that's just one example of how time zones are difficult. There are other examples, like within the US, we just ended daylight savings time, which basically means that last night at 2 a.m. or 2:15 or whatever the time is, our time jumped backwards an hour. Which, great, an extra hour of sleep one night a year. The downside to that is that when we jump into daylight saving time again, that's the week around daylight savings time is the week that most heart attacks occur in the U.S. There are two common dates in the U.S. where the most heart attacks occur. The first date is very, very transient, because it's the date after the first major snowfall. People go out, and that's like the first major exercise they've gotten in a long time. They need to clear their driveway to get to work. They're working harder, and that can cause heart attacks. The second is the week around, the week after daylight savings time. So that skipping forward an hour triggers heart attacks. Because of that, there are states within the U.S. Indiana's one, Arizona's another, that don't do the time switching. So they switch time zones depending on whether we're in daylight saving time or not. And that's another big mess, right? The introduction of a date only makes a ton of sense. If I say, Halloween always happens on October 31st, when I attach a time zone to that, it becomes difficult, right? So what do? We remove the time zone and stuff. Well, with a date only object, October 31st is always October 31st. So there's some powerful stuff there. There's time only, but temporal is very, very cool. So we can get the current instant, we can get time zone, we can get all sorts of fun stuff like that. But there's also these, it's easier to work with months, days, and years with temporal. Duration is the word I was looking for. But we can say, hey, we want a duration of 5 minutes and 30 seconds. This is obviously not a duration of 5 minutes and 30 seconds. This is 130 hours and 20 minutes. But we can create a duration from this and then convert that duration to seconds, milliseconds, right? There's all sorts of handling around time zones. There's all sorts of handling around calendars, right? For the most part, we use the Gregorian calendar, but, certain things revolve around the Chinese calendar, like, the Chinese New Year. And there are all sorts of other calendars out there that's not Gregorian. And temporal has good support for calendars. And, parsing becomes a whole lot easier. But there's just a whole bunch around temporal that I'm looking forward to. And if it ever moves out of stage 3 and TC39, that'll be a big celebration in a lot of places. That's going to do away with things like all of the date handling libraries out there. So, yeah, it is some crazy stats. Yeah, it's 11:23 p.m. in India right there, right? And right now for me, I imagine you said this like a couple minutes ago. Right now it's 10:57, right? So half hour. That half hour difference is just a little bit strange, and you have to recognize that there's so many people in India that you have to make sure your software works in India. Once you go international. That's the big thing, right? A lot of companies, when they start small, are very focused culturally on their culture in the world, and this creates havoc for a lot of, like, one of the things about the U.S. is we do so many things so different than everywhere else that when you create something culturally for the US, it causes confusion in every place. Dates is one of those, right? For the US, it's always month, day, year, right? For the rest of the world, it's almost always day, month, year. And that, me being US native, that throws me for a loop when I see something like, 31-10-25. I'm like, wait, what is that? Right? Oh, that's a date. That's that's October 31st. It's very, very confusing for people when, in the rest of the world, when they see 10/31/25, and they're like, oh yeah, that's a US date, right? But it becomes even more confusing when you do something like 6/12/25, right? Is that June 12th? Or is that December 6th, right? And it's very, very culturally contextual as to how you interpret that date. For something like, October 31st, it's obvious there's not a 31st month. So when that 31 shows up in the wrong place for your culture, well, you know that it's a culturally different date. And those are mistakes that get made at a software level, because one, it's expensive to engineer for multiple cultures, right? And two, most people, and maybe I'm projecting the U.S. on the rest of the world, but I'll say most people in the U.S. don't think outside of U.S. cultural, you know, specifics. We talk in Fahrenheit. We talk, our dates are the way they are. We talk in miles and inches instead of meters and centimeters. And those things, are fine when it's confined to within the US, or even, I'm sure Canada and Mexico are used to dealing with our quirkiness because of our next door neighbors, right? It gets a little bit weirder when you go other places. It's the same with, like, you have to recognize when you go international, that there are a lot of English speakers in India, like a ridiculous amount. And they're also just slightly off on time zones. And, you have to recognize that culturally you have to understand that, culturally the rest of the world is different than the US. And so these are the kinds of thoughts that make dates difficult. So, yeah. So have databases handle dates? Databases, the biggest problem with dates, right, is like everybody will tell you, oh, just store your dates as UTC in the database. The biggest problem with dates is not how they're stored, is not how they're transferred over the wire. The biggest problem with dates is how they're displayed in the browser. And the reason that that's a problem is that the browser dates have built-in time zones. And if you don't handle that in your date code, then a date that's stored in UTC midnight in your database that displays normally for most of the world suddenly doesn't work in India. Why? Because India's time zone is slightly different. And so handling the dates at the database layer does solve a big portion of the problem. But another big portion of the problem is that the JavaScript date just has built-in time zone information. And if you don't take that into account, then the time zone is going to use the time zone of the local browser, and that's going to make a mess, even though you try to be careful everywhere else. And so that's the biggest problem, and that's what temporal is trying to solve, right? With plain dates, with plain time and plain date time. We might say, that like Steam, right? Steam may say, hey, we're going to have a universal release, and it's going to be at 10 a.m. on November 4th, right? For whatever reason. And I don't look that up. I'm just making that date up. I don't know it's being released that day. And I don't even know if that's a release day. But there's a benefit to Steam doing that because they basically get a rolling date as it rolls across all the time zones, right? You hit the first time zone and you get a portion of the world, and then the next time zone adds a little portion, and so you slowly roll across the world. There's another component to this where I stream every Sunday at 10 a.m. Mountain. If we take the time zone out of that, right, 10 a.m. Mountain, and I just say I stream every Sunday at 10 a.m., well, people who tune in at 10 a.m. local time, like Australia, right, tuned in yesterday. right? And there are still people like Hawaii who won't be tuning in for another couple of hours. Well, I'm not streaming for most of that time, right? 22 out of the 24 hours on my 2-hour stream, I'm not streaming. And for a good portion of that, because I'm mountain time and I'm closer to, I'm closer to the international date line than I am to the prime meridian. That means that most of the world is going to hit that stream before I even start streaming, right? And then a very small portion of the world will tune in and they can maybe catch a replay. So, right, there are dates and times that shouldn't have time zones attached to them, but a good portion of dates and times should have time zones attached to them. And that's why I think that JavaScript decided that every date and time should have a time zone attached to it. And that's when developers are like, okay, well, I'll just set the time to 00, right, midnight. But then you get India that for part of the time, they're a half hour ahead of my time zone. And the rest of the time, they're a half hour behind my time zone. So midnight can be, it could be the wrong date. And we're off on dates. Yeah, exactly, Marcus. Dates are difficult. And right, this is the kind of stuff you can tell a developer who has been in the trenches. If as soon as you mention dates, they get anxious, right? An engineer who's been in these trenches, because as soon as you start talking dates and times, and everybody's like, "Oh yeah, we'll just store it as UTC," and they're in the corner, and they're just like, "Oh no, what's going on? We're going down the wrong path again." And maybe they raise their hand, and everybody's like, "No, UTC will handle it." And this poor engineer who's been in it is like, "Oh, here we go again," right? Temporals should help with a lot of this. And it really does come down to the way the date object works. It creates so many messes. And man, we spent an hour and I haven't even looked at the code yet. But thank you guys. I'm laughing at myself here. Please don't take my comments as being, hey, don't pull me off topic. Never take that. I think, so the way I look at my stream is to help everybody who attends level up. You may not have encountered the date issues that we're talking about here, right? You may have encountered them, and you guys may have comments that even add to what I'm saying. I don't want you guys to ever feel like you shouldn't make comments because I'm focusing somewhere. If I really feel like I need to focus somewhere, I'll be like, hey, we'll talk about that later or something like that. I'm never going to get mad at you guys for, Chow called it nerd sniping. And it works well. It comes from XKCD, if you guys haven't seen the comment. But the point of the XKCD comment, and I'll put this in chat so you guys can look at it. But the point of this is that the problem with the engineering brain is that if you give them a problem that's interesting to them, they're going to stop everything and try and solve the problem. So the idea here is they're putting up an electrical resistance diagram as an engineer is crossing the road, right, and they get hit by a truck. Right? It's kind of dark, but the idea is that it's very, very easy to pull the engineering mind off task by giving it an equally interesting task. We can joke about, I'm like that dog in Up where I'm like, oh, squirrel, right? Or, ooh, shiny, or whatever. I'm perfectly fine with that. I'm perfectly fine with helping work through, questions or issues that you guys might be coming up with at work or in your professional career, wherever it is. happy to talk about that. That's why I'm perfectly happy to talk about temporal. I'm perfectly happy to talk about other frameworks, and things like that. The topics that I'm just not going to touch is anything like political that has nothing to do with tech. Um, the majority of political topics, I'm just not going to touch them, and quite often I'm probably going to ignore them. Um, if they have to do with tech, then I will have an opinion. I need to be very, very careful about my opinions. And, I don't want to ever devolve into, political ideology. I will take a look at stuff from a technical standpoint. One of the big ones in the US right now is there's a whole bunch of people who are trying to make it so that teens and younger can't get access to, AI chatbots. And this is a tough one for me because I understand parents who had AI chatbots tell their teens and their kids to do terrible things. If I had somebody telling my kids to do terrible things, I would feel very, very strongly about it too. The issue I have here is that when we start talking about LLMs, when we start talking about AI, when we start hobbling and weakening those, what we're doing is we're actually hobbling and weakening them for the people who have the least amount of access. And what that does is it creates a gap between the haves and the have-nots. I can tell you right now that I highly doubt that Elon Musk works with censored AI. Right? I highly doubt that Bill Gates works with censored AI. They've got enough money and resources that they can do whatever they want. However, when you get into more poverty-stricken places, those people are probably working with some of the most censored AIs, right? For us as technical people, we probably know how to use Hugging Face. We probably know how to do, right? Like our LLMs are maybe a little bit less censored, but they're still censored, right? And so as your resources increase, the people who have access to the better tools are the ones with the more resources. And this is my problem, and I sniped myself. But this is my problem with discussions like the ones we're having in the US right now, is we don't look at the consequences. We're looking more at the heartbreaking story of the outcome of this. And I don't want to say more than that, right? There's a heartbreaking outcome to this, but there is also a longer term consequence that if we take certain stances can harm more people over the long run. And so, I'm happy to discuss things like that. There are other things that I'm obviously never going to touch, and I'm not going to even mention them here. And if you want to participate in that kind of stuff, stuff that's going to violate like community, violate the community, make the community feel less safe, make the community feel like they're whatever, then you're most likely going to get banned. Actually, not most likely, you will get banned. We're not going to touch on stuff like that. That's not what this stream is for. We're not a political stream. We're not a stream that's trying to be controversial. So I want everybody here to feel safe. I want everybody here to feel like they can come here and bring their problems, and we can talk about their problems, and we can have good discussions. You're never going to get banned if you come in here and try to push React. You're never going to get banned if you come in here and you try to push Vue. You will get banned if you're insensitive and you're causing other people to feel less safe. But I think trolls serve a purpose in forcing me to evaluate my position and have to defend my position. So, that's fine. Um, so yeah, it got a little bit deeper and heavier there, but we run the gamut here on this stream. We definitely do Angular stuff. But I look at Angular as a vehicle to discuss the bigger tech picture. And the reality is, at some point in time, Angular is going to disappear. I don't know when that is. I'm not going to prognosticate on when that is. And, at some point in time, React is going to disappear. There was a point in time where I thought nobody thought that jQuery would fall out of favor. jQuery ran the web. So we have to recognize that, yes, Angular is important, and Angular is important to the people who attend this stream, and we should be doing Angular as far as I'm concerned. However, the bigger, deeper principles are, architectural principles, engineering principles, maybe even a little bit of, morally, as a moral professional, maybe we should be making decisions certain ways. So yeah, they could ban internet at all. Exactly. You just have to be very, very careful. The law of unintended consequences, and it's always very, very difficult to talk about politically and emotionally charged subjects, because the one thing I don't want to do is downplay the reality of what the parents experienced. I never want to downplay that. As a parent myself, I can't imagine what I would feel if the outcomes that have happened had happened to my children. Right? It would be very, very difficult for me to be in that situation. So, discussions like this are very, very difficult because they're very politically charged and they're also very emotionally charged. And it can often seem cold or uncaring when we bring up the bigger picture of the laws of unintended consequences. And I don't want it, right? I don't want to communicate or come across that way. I probably will. It's very, very, it's nearly impossible not to. If, in these situations, there are people who are going to take the comments that I make as being uncaring or whatever, right? But the reality is, when we make decisions, and we can bring this back into tech. I've been having this discussion a lot at work because we're trying to solve some issues. And one of the biggest problems we have as engineers, and we want to solve problems with technical solutions, right? And so if the code's not formatted the way we want it to be, we use Prettier, we use ESLint, right? If people are using libraries we don't want them to use, right? We try to use technical solutions to ban libraries. We try to use technical solutions to enforce patterns. We try to use technical solutions to help enforce problems. One of the issues that we have with that is that a good portion of problems can't be solved with technical solutions. And so then we start putting technical solution on top of technical solution on top, and we wind up with these technical solution messes that are governance, right, around governance issues. And what really could have helped is if we'd stopped and thought about the law of unintended consequences and gamification. When we make decisions in a technical environment, when we start punishing certain behaviors, we're going to get less of that behavior. When we start rewarding certain behaviors, we're going to get more of that behavior. That's gamification, right? So one of the places where you'll see gamification quite a bit across all industries is if a group comes out and publishes a list of this is what you need to do to get promoted, you'll start seeing that everybody starts doing what's on that list, right? Everybody wants to be promoted. That's gamification. I'm going to give myself the most points on the promotion chart so that I can get promoted. There's often more to it than what's on the promotion chart. And it can become, a politically charged environment when somebody else who's viewed as having fewer points on the promotion chart gets promoted. But that's gamification, right? So when we introduce technical solutions that start penalizing devs for doing certain things, then what they're going to do is avoid that pain. And this can come about, gamification can come about in other ways, right? Like code coverage can lead to gamification. I'm actually not a big fan of code coverage numbers. So when somebody tells me they have 100% code coverage, I just kind of, okay, right? But in my head, I'm going, man, you've got some bad tests in your code base. There's no way you reached 100% code coverage with good tests. It's just not possible. That's what's going on in my head, right? And maybe we can have a discussion around that, whether or not it's possible. But the reality is, as far as my experience has taught me, you should focus on testing very, very well important parts of the code. You should focus on isolating code so it can be testable. But getting 100% code coverage, like there's no reason for me to test all of my templates. There's right. But again, philosophical, right? But when you create code coverage numbers, what you do is you gamify testing. So you wind up with code bases that are full of, right, X component should render, right? X component should do this, X component should do that. The tests, like the should render test, is not really that useful because all your other tests will fail if the component doesn't render. But what that should render test does is it covers a whole bunch of your code. So you get that code coverage number up. So that, that's what I mean with gamification. And then, the law of unintended consequences often comes about because of gamification, where you have good intentions with what you release, but it tends to cause another issue, right? And that's where we need to look at a lot of decisions, especially as you get higher, like as you get more senior in the decisions you're making. Decisions need to be looked at from 2 points of view. The first point of view is technical, right? Is it technically feasible? Can we implement a technical solution? Things like that. The second point of view is cultural. And the cultural point of view is often more difficult because there's always a momentum behind the current way of doing things. And that's natural. As humans, we develop shortcuts. Our brains develop these shortcuts and they help us save memory, or not memory, but they help us save energy and processing time, maybe memory, things like that. Where if we do things the same way over and over again, it feels good to us because our brain doesn't have to do a lot. And so, we get stuck with this momentum of wanting to do things. As soon as somebody disrupts that, it becomes very, very very disruptive to our brains also. And our brains are like, no, we've always done it the other way. We need to do it the other way. Why? Because our brain has built those shortcuts. It doesn't need to spend the processing power. So when we disrupt that and it has to spend the processing power, well, that's energy budget, that's time budget, that's all sorts of other things. And if we look at our brain as a survival mechanism, time budgets are very, very important to our brain, because decisions that can be made in a split second can help save our life. Decisions where we have to slow down and think could lead to us being harmed, or right. So our brain is wired to prefer split second decisions, and things like that. And so, cultural and technical, and that's why it's often difficult to get technical solutions to work the way you intended them to, because culturally people want to continue with that momentum they have. Do you think this all layoff happens because of AI? I don't feel like AI can replace us. Sure, it is helping, but I can't tell it to do something and have a free time. Well, and maybe we won't get into some technical stuff. We'll write some code today. We need to write some code today. I want to write some code. We've got a half hour. I don't know. You just sniped me really well. AI, and when I talk about AI, I want to be very, very careful about AI. I want to talk about LLMs, and I was on the Angular Plus show where the Angular Plus podcast where we talked about this. LLMs and AI has the capability to enhance our work. The problem is that you have these big AI companies that are basically running at a deficit. And I haven't looked at the numbers lately. But if you look at Copilot, Copilot's been running at a deficit forever. The latest thing that saved Copilot was they made a new agreement with Microsoft, and Microsoft dumped a whole bunch of money into them, right? Claude, OpenAI, all the big ones, Grok, all the big ones are still running at a deficit. To get out of this deficit, what they have to do is they have to convince companies that it's worth paying money for them, right? And not just a little bit of money, but a significant amount of money, because the amount of power and processing and hardware and all of this stuff is expensive. And you can look at this, Google just purchased a nuclear reactor to be able to run one of its AI farms. That's the sheer amount of power and energy that goes into these LLMs and AI farms is staggering. So we've got these companies who are running at a loss. They're trying to figure out how to survive. They're trying to figure out how to be profitable. Well, the way to be profitable is to convince people very, very senior in companies that they're the replacement for expensive, lazy, whatever you want to call developers, right? When you don't understand engineering, and when you don't understand your developers and things like that, we're an enigma to a lot of the senior leadership, right? It's difficult to understand why what we do is so hard, and why it can take so much time to do what we do. So, there are two strategies here that are leading to the layoffs. The first strategy is, agentic flows, things like that are going to replace 20% of your staff. So you get somebody in a senior leadership who's like, oh, okay. They sign a deal, and then they lay off 20% of their staff, and they tell the rest of their staff, you guys need to use AI or you're going to get laid off, right? Because they need to make this AI worth it. And then they're trying to look at how much more of their staff they can replace, because this AI, this agentic flow is supposed to be more predictable, and it can work 24/7, and like a lot of the stuff they say is true. And then the second way they do it is, we can augment cheaper places to be better developers by giving them AI. And there's a bunch wrong with this, right? Like, just because somebody lives in a country where, it's cheaper to hire them and whatever, doesn't mean that they're a lower quality engineer or whatever, so there's a problem there. But the other problem to that is, you get places that have lower levels of governance and things like that, that go out and exploit people, and they take people who are probably not qualified to be doing what they're doing, but they can get them for much cheaper than the people in their own country who have degrees who are qualified to be doing what they're doing. They give them AIs, right, LLMs, and they throw them at the problem while they try to keep most of the profit, right? And so it becomes very exploitive that way. But that again leads to, you can lay off 20% of your 20% of your workforce, ship it, to whatever country. They could do the work for you, augmented by AI. And then the engineers that you keep can make sure that what they're doing is good quality work. And the reason that, a lot of times that foreign work is seen as lower quality is because of that exploitive nature, where instead of hiring qualified people, we just grab a bunch of people. We try to push them through programs. These people just want to feed their families. And right, the people that are pushing this are really just trying to get as much money as possible before the scheme breaks. And this isn't always the case. I need to be careful here. This isn't always the case. But a lot of layoffs can be seen because of, these two things happening. So the reality is, engineering is expensive. Engineering is not understood by people who aren't engineers. And AIs and LLMs are disruptive. If you differentiate yourself from everybody else by the code that you write, you're in trouble. That's the reality. An agentic flow can produce code 24/7, and agentic code is probably cheaper than you. An agentic flow, so that's not the right way to survive in today's world. The right way to survive is you need to embrace AI and LLMs. So take the time to learn to be good at prompting AIs and LLMs. Take the time to, if you can, run your own LLMs and understand what that means. And if you can't run your own LLMs, there are places out there that will host LLMs for you, usually at a good, reasonable price. But learn to work with LLMs and AIs that aren't, ChatGPT, OpenAI stuff, that aren't, Gemini, that aren't, and learn what that means, and learn what the different terms in AI means. That's the first thing you can do, is understand how LLMs and AIs work. The second thing you need to do is you need to differentiate yourself from the code. Right? The value that you bring, even if you see yourself purely as a coder, the value that you bring is not the code that you write. The value that you bring is the ability to provide context to what the requirements are. Even if you're just purely a coder, that context is important. So when you go into a company, one of the first things you should do is learn how that company makes money. Learn the context and the lingo of that company. Right? The days of keeping your head down and writing code are over. AIs and LLM have solved that. The bigger issue that we need now is, and the place where I learned this was when I started working with image generation AIs. I knew what I wanted the image generation AI to generate, but no matter how I prompted it, I wouldn't get what I want. Why? Well, because the AI had never seen it. It didn't know how to turn what I wanted into, into something. And it tried, and you would get all these weird hallucinations and things. It's the same way with code generation. No matter how good your code generation is, there are going to be things contextually that it's not going to understand about your industry. That's the value that you bring, is that contextual piece. There's always going to be places where you're going to fit, where AI generated code is not going to make sense. You may be writing the framework that AI will flesh out, um, but it's that deeper understanding, it's that contextual understanding that only comes from being embedded in your industry for a while. Um, the second thing is good engineering practices and things like that. Your critical thinking and things like that are going to help you. Um, I think the layoffs are going to continue for a while at least. It's just the reality of, you know, the money needs the money has to come from somewhere. The AI the AI companies need to survive. To do that, they need to get money from somewhere. And the way most companies save money is by cutting jobs. Um, and I think that's, as more and more AI companies make deals with bigger and bigger companies, you're going to see more layoffs coming. Um, and I don't know how long that will continue for, but there are things that you can do that still provide value. But I don't know. I don't. There's a lot I don't know. I agree with you there, Ole. And even the guy who coined the term vibe coding and pushed it really, really hard, his last tool, he didn't even vibe code, right? Um, there. And if you go, one of the things I was reading recently is if you go on Fiverr right now, one of the hottest growing areas in Fiverr and a lot of the sites similar to Fiverr is people are setting up, I can help you fix your vibe coded mess. Um, and so, there's only so much you can do with a prompt. And then once you get into the nuances and stuff like that, that's where we exist. And so, it may get to a point where our industry is more contractual, where bigger companies are generating just this big sloppy mess of AI prompts that generates this big sloppy mess of code. And then you come in with your team that's contracted to come in and fix whatever issue in your hazmat suits, and your gas masks so you don't breathe in the stinky code, and you fix up messes. That may be the direction that things go. Um, the reality is that technical people are still going to be needed. People who can understand logic, and think through logical conundrums and puzzles will always be needed. People who can communicate with the hardware, um, the what are they called in Warhammer? Um, the tech whisperers, is that what they're called? The people who know the specific chants to make the technology that people don't understand do what it needs to do. Um, there will always be a call for those kinds of people. And so our industry is being disrupted right now, and it's a very uncertain time. And for anybody caught up in it, it's rough. At the beginning of this year, I spent 5 months looking for a job. Um, and that's kind of the reality right now, is that job searches are much more difficult. And understanding how to say the correct incantations, to make the tech do what it needs to do, is becoming more and more important than ever. Yeah. Vibe code cleanup specialists. Yeah. And that may be the reality, right? We become the janitors of the code bases. That could be the reality. The maybe maybe you know 10 years in the future is one of the dirty jobs, right? You get paid a lot to do something that nobody understands what you do, and it's a really messy job that you do. I don't know, I'm just joking, but yeah, it's a it's a fascinating world that we live in. Things are things are scary, but I also see a lot of hope in the direction that things are heading. Things are very scary right now because you watch even very, very senior level people get hit, and people that you never would have assumed would get hit with layoffs or whatever. Um, and you realize that things are scary and almost seem random right now. But the other side of that coin is, um, we know that LLMs can't generate stuff they've never seen. And so there's always going to be that space where LLMs hallucinate a whole bunch of shit. And people are like, yeah, this doesn't make any sense. And they need the people who speak the proper incantations to come in and clean it up and be like, no, this doesn't make sense. Let's clean it up, right? So yeah. Vibe coding cleanup sounds like someone just will try to do refactors. And that's an interesting call out, Ole. And one of the best things you can learn as you get more and more senior in your career. So the way I look at how you should build your career as a junior, your job is to learn fundamentals, right? Like you learn some of that pre getting a job. But as a junior engineer, your job is to learn fundamentals. You need to become really, really good at the language you work in. Become very, very good at the framework that you work in. Start understanding the technology that you work in, stuff like that. Once you've reached a level of competency that your job is easy for you as a junior, the next thing to do is to start getting into the more theoretical side of things. Start understanding, design patterns, start understanding testing, start understanding, right? Start getting into the more theoretical part of your job. Doing that will take you from a junior to a mid to a senior very, very easily. There's so much there that you need to learn. Once you get to that point, it's back to applying theory to technical stuff. And one of the places where applying theory to technical is very, very powerful is in refactoring. So, once you're at the senior level, if you want to start moving even higher, leadership is a big piece. Communication is a big piece, right? Your soft skills start becoming a bigger piece. Once you reach that senior level, to go beyond senior level, you need to start understanding how to lead and influence others. You need to start understanding how to communicate effectively. You need to understand how to, the psychology of teams and things like that. But on the technical side of things, you need to start understanding, how do I take the theory I've learned and start becoming practical with it? One of the best places to start taking the theory around design patterns is in refactoring. Taking a messy, bloated piece of code and turning it into something that's beautiful and maintainable and easy to work with. I mean, you say it sounds like refactoring. I think refactoring is one of the most rewarding and most difficult tasks you'll take on. And when I'm talking about refactoring, I'm talking about project-wide refactoring, right? I'm not talking about small code changes in a file. There are two types of refactoring, but I'm talking about how do you take a piece of code that nobody wants to touch and turn it into something that everybody can work with. that's the level of refactoring that moves you beyond senior into higher levels. And then, as you get more and more into the leadership side of things, you may move into roles like director, or if you get more and more into the IC side of things, you may be moving into like staff and distinguished engineering and stuff like that. And it's often difficult to make that decision between whether you want to be leadership or whether you want to be an individual contributor. But that's kind of the roadmap. If I were to go back to me as a very, very junior developer and say, this is the roadmap you should follow, that's the roadmap that I would give myself. It's just it is just a marketing instead of developer. You need to call yourselves vibe coding cleanup specialist and still do your regular work. Like, you're not wrong, Ole. And this is like when I talk to people, and when I tell them, they're like, hey, I want to interview for a job. How do I get a job? A lot of it comes down to marketing. And the piece of advice that I give people whenever they're looking for a job is, and this may be culturally very US centric, so I'll explain it after I say it, right? But you need to become the used car salesman of yourself. And what do I mean by that? Oh no. Yeah. Oh no. I am only pushing. I may be lagging. I'm not showing that I'm dropping packets, but I'm not pushing as much data. So maybe we won't write code today. Thank you for the heads up on that. Let me take a look at my stream health. Oh yeah. It definitely dropped for a bit. It looks like it's recovered, but it definitely dropped for a bit. And maybe I need to end here soon. So we might not get into code today. We'll definitely get into some code next week. I actually think streams like today are helpful. You guys let me know. But going back to the AI, to like the used car salesperson, in the US, it's kind of a meme or a trope that the used car salesperson, when you show up on a lot, their job is to get you to buy the car. They're going to deflect questions. They're going to mislead. They're going to show you the best parts of the car, right? Some of them will outright lie to you. That last part is fraud and it's illegal, but that doesn't stop people from doing that. I'm not suggesting that you get into lying and fraud and stuff like that. What I am suggesting is that your job when you're interviewing